Yeah, so the whole plane had to turn around, even though it was on its way, I think, to Geneva. I'm not sure, but it had to go back to Atlanta because somebody had a issue on the plane and flew back. So it's been quite the potty-tastic day for folks in the airline industry, I think.
There's
I think
just
that
a new
the
day,
chat
another airline story.
Another day, yeah.
was flying back from DEF CON and going to New York, and we were over Chicago, and they had two calls for hey, is there a doctor on board? And I was like, oh my God, I hope this person's okay. And I thought like we were right over Chicago. So I was like, hey, if we're going to stop, this is a time stop, right? Because you're right over a city. I can't imagine like, what do you turn like halfway over the Atlantic? How's that work?
Was it really just like somebody was curious about the symbology in a Robert Frost poem, and they just needed to make sure they had that doctor of literature kind of come in and...
Doctor of Literature.
For someone's
Well,
parents, either asking for a doctor, they're not asking for an InfoSec consultant, are they?
well, for anyone who has not heard, there was a ground stop just in the last 30 minutes. United, a full ground stop over an equipment outage. And so instead of preparing for the show like I should have been, I've been going down a rabbit hole on that. It's lifted just in the last, I don't know, 5-10 minutes, they lifted it. But curious, always whenever there's an IT outage with the FAA, I'm always like, was it a cyber attack?
I was
It
talking
was
about the
not.
Delta flight that had to turn around because somebody's stomach exploded. Basically, it's
Oh yeah, no, I
you
saw
go
that
high,
story
I went
too.
low. It's kind
Yeah,
of
we were
our...
talking about different things, but
Yeah,
yeah,
it was a crappy situation, no matter what.
yeah, that is a very unfortunate
Thank you. That
story.
was a very long pull for that joke. Welcome to Coffee Talk, where the humor is puerile and Audra keeps it above board. So there we go. We'll be talking for about 30, 45 minutes today. We have a wide variety of subjects, as always. I'm Ryan Kovar. This is Mick Baccio and Audra Streetman, and welcome to Coffee Talk. Audra, I think we should do the news. Producers.
Yes. All right. Well, let's
To
go
the
ahead
clip.
and roll a clip. Yep. All right. So for our first story, this just came out this morning. The Washington Post Cybersecurity 202 newsletter was actually the first to report that Peter Zatko, who is also known as Mudge, is joining CISA part-time. And his whole aim in this position, this part-time job, is to help the agency with their Secure by Design campaign. And Secure by Design, that's essentially placing accountability on technology vendors and business leaders instead of customers in terms of securing code and, secure by default, that type of concept and that culture is what he aims to promote. And you might recognize him, Mudge, as the Twitter whistleblower who actually testified before Congress about what he's calling severe security deficiencies at Twitter, where he was actually the security chief for a time. And he's also, he was a member of Loft, which was, that very well-known hacking collective that started up decades ago. And so I'm curious, what do you make of this, especially, Mick, is with your background working for the White House and working in that. This is for CISA. I know we were talking about that earlier. What is the difference between working for the administration versus a government position? But what do you make of this announcement?
I think it's fantastic, and it's in line with other appointments that CISA has both sort of signed on, if not as a strategic advisory and a cybersecurity review board. A lot of folks we know have been on that. I think Jeff Moss would be another advisor we've seen in this capacity. So I think it gives CISA exactly what they want and need, is a lot of credibility in this area, and he is very outspoken in his beliefs and principles, as we've seen. So I think if there is a needle to be moved, he would likely be a person that would gear it in that direction. So I'm excited to see what comes out of it.
Well, it made a huge difference at Twitter. So I mean, I'm sure he will just have as much. I'm fascinated by it. It's interesting. We were talking about it. I was like, oh, is he part of the Biden administration or CISA? And Audra was like, no, part of the Biden administration, which, she was absolutely correct. I find it interesting as part-time, which you don't see very often in the government. But, Mudge is a very busy person. Marcus LaFerrera, who works on Surge, worked with him at DARPA for a while, and he was incredibly impactful there. But there has been criticism that, is this another attention grab for CISA? Is it going to make an actual impact? I think it kind of goes both ways. I don't think you get funding. I don't think you get change unless people have attention. So I don't think it's a bad thing at all.
Yeah, and if you're aiming for a culture change, even just people talking about it is it working, right? You want people to talk about it. You want it to be in the news. And I think that's happening today, at least. I guess the question is, will it continue to be a discussion point, and will companies actually take this on because they have no reason to out of wanting to do it, right? Like there's not a mandate, there's no incentive other than pressure, right? I mean, that's the whole point of this, is creating a culture where this is the expectation and not a nicety to have your software be secure by design.
Yeah, and Mudge was part of an Obama administration program called Cyber UL, which was kind of inspired by the the Underwriters Laboratory that you obviously see on the background of, on the back of lamps and things about that around electricity. And so I am curious. I looked around a little bit today, and it seems like there's some connection, but I wouldn't be surprised that this is a continuation of the work that he did previously at the White House.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So we'll definitely keep an eye on that and see what happens when he starts and how they're going to help push that campaign forward. I'm interested to see it. So let's move on to our next story. This one is Qakbot. So the FBI is continuing to dismantle cyber criminal infrastructure. I can't talk. And so this was actually big news last week. The FBI announced this multinational operation to dismantle Qakbot, which is a type of malware and also this large-scale botnet. And so this happened in multiple countries: US, France, Germany, Netherlands, Romania, Latvia, UK. And it's one of the largest US-led disruptions of a botnet. And so this was actually interesting because the FBI was able to reroute the traffic from these infected devices toward FBI servers. And they were actually able to install, sorry, I thought I heard something there. They were actually able to put something that would uninstall Qakbot from those devices. So that's what happened here. And, Qakbot's been around since like 2008. So this has been a long-term problem. A lot of ransomware attacks are leveraged using Qakbot. It's primarily, its attack vector is a lot of phishing emails with malicious attachments is a very common way that it's used to infect computers. And so, yeah, the fact that they were able to download and uninstaller, it reminds me when they did the Hive takedown, they were able to do something similar where they were able to infiltrate these infected devices and kind of give it the same instructions. So we've seen it happen with Hive. We saw it happen with DarkSide after Colonial Pipeline when they were able to go in and recover some of that cryptocurrency that was stolen. It was like 2.3 million in cryptocurrency. Yeah, so I think this is great. I know a lot of people are like, well, it doesn't matter. Qakbot's going to come up again in another way. But I still think that this makes a difference when you continually see the FBI having successful operations. Don't you think?
I went like a week thinking it was Qakebot.
Qakebot.
So I'm just still upset by this. Like the words are too similar. Qakebot versus Qakbot.
Well, there's no you.
Upsetting.
It's just
I know. I'm just saying it's upsetting to me. I wish the nomenclature was more clear. I think they should really work on that as a criminal organization. I feel like
it sounds like it's a non-issue at the moment, right?
Yeah, they're just done. Yeah.
I really, to your point, Audra, I think interdictions, multinational, by the FBI and their involvement aren't new. We've seen this going back way. I mean, like the hell.org, even that far. So it's fantastic to see. But to your point, this isn't going to stop ransomware actors. It's going to stop a moment in time. So I think it's a fantastic effort, and I think it's laying the blueprint to a repeatable process. Until we figure out a better way to stop ransomware actors, then we're going to see interdictions like this. And if it's what it takes, it's what it takes. So I don't think this is over, but I don't think it stops the actors like we think it does. But I think it disrupts an entire infrastructure. So nature abhors a vacuum. I'm curious what happens next, who the next threat actor that pops up that will be the next victim of an FBI interdiction.
I think for me, the interesting part was it felt like they had a much more hands-on approach than a lot of times where it's just like, oh, we're taking down servers. It reminded me of Hafnium and when they were actively patching Exchange servers, web shells.
Well, you've heard of active defense. This is really just active patching. It's just
we're going to put your shields up for you, literally for you. We're just going to take it to the next level. You don't put your shield
up, or I'll put it up.
Chancla is going to come out. Jen's going to have a cyber chancla, throwing it at people. I like the idea. I'm with you on that. Like, what's the long-term viability of this as well? How much of this is whack-a-mole? I'm also curious because sometimes we hear about this, and this is like one of those dirty cyber secrets. Like you talk to the researchers, and they're like, "Oh, we found over 5,000 servers," and then you see what comes out on the other side, and it's like the FBI took down 14. You're like, "Oh, but they found this many." Yeah, well, we were able to get 15, and that's the win we're going to take today.
And actually, I was confusing two things. So with Hive, they were actually able to infiltrate the network of the ransomware group, find the decryption keys, give those to the victims. Whereas what I was thinking about that was very similar was the snake malware takedown with FBI, where they were actually able to get onto infected devices with Snake and then issue commands on those devices to make Snake uninstall itself. So this was like the same strategy that they used with that. That's what I was confusing. So that was another example of an FBI operation. Yeah.
I'm just thinking about the old game on probably too young for you, Audra, but the Nokia had the snake, follow the snake with the dot and make sure it didn't eat itself. And now that's what I'm imagining they're doing. So I'm 100% there today. Full cyber right here. Nokia.
Yeah. So I guess that's an effective strategy. Like if you can access an infected device, you can issue commands to uninstall it. The only problem though is Qakbot malware still exists, and there's still probably emails being sent with attachments that download.
Conficker still exists, terrifyingly enough.
Right. So
for me, I do wonder, and Mick, you alluded to this, like, so we took down more infrastructure, but the people behind it are still there. And so for me, it kind of goes like, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. I think it's going to provide some respite or protection for some people today. But until they're actually able to go after the people who are doing the work, or show that there are actually consequences, is it just a feel-good story for the day, or is it going to make an impact? I don't know.
Well, I think the fact that this huge botnet is falling apart is an impact, right? I mean, the botnet, the scale of it, this operation could have, if it hadn't happened, this would have still existed. So I think that's probably the biggest accomplishment. Yeah. So
no, I mean, it's definitely going to help some people today, which is always good.
I think it goes to the axiom of imposing cost, which is a goal if you're unable to disrupt completely, then you impose cost on an adversary. And I think if there is a group of adversaries behind this, there was definitely a severe cost imposed by this operation.
Yeah, and then the collective cost, right? The FBI continually comes out with these announcements. I mean, just in this year alone, this is the third, right, that I can think of. So if we continually see several of these a year over time, I think that can.
How many botnets are there, though? Like,
there's the Mirai botnet. There's the Qakbot botnet. There's the.
I mean, this is why I'm not worried about my job security. So this is. I celebrate the win, and I also acknowledge there's a lot more work to do. That's for sure.
Right. Well, let's move on.
That's a big one, though. We know some of the folks there. They were really excited about it. I mean, I know we talked to some researchers about it, and as you said, it's a good win. We'll celebrate it.
Yes.
And we'll celebrate it again next week and the week afterwards, the week after that.
So our third news story, we're learning more about cyber operations in Russia and the war in Ukraine. This was a Five Eyes report about malware that they're calling infamous Chisel. And so this is a collection of components that target Android devices. And these attacks that they observed target Ukrainian service members who have Android devices. And so the Russia Link Samworm APT group is using this to target Ukraine for intelligence purposes. And that actually does align with what Ukrainian officials were assessing, that Russia has shifted from disruptive operations like wiper attacks that we saw at the beginning of the war toward more targeted intelligence collection. And, Sandworm, if you're not familiar, is part of the Russian GRU, which is its military intelligence agency. So it makes sense that they would be behind this. And, They were also behind the attacks in 2015 and 2016 that targeted Ukraine's electric grid, and that was more of a very much of a sabotage, destructive attack, right? With physical impacts, with the electricity going out.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see that this is kind of the trend of how these cyber operations are going.
It's not a surprise to me with the superiority of the Android operating system. But in a more serious note, I think last I saw, 70% of the world has Android as a operating system. So when you start looking at just the scale, it's not a huge surprise. I think the only two countries, I was looking at this before the show, only Japan and the US have Apple as the largest percentage of operating systems globally for mobile phones. And this is, at the end of the day, this is a mobile computer, right? I've taken probably 10 phone calls in the last 30 days on this, and I use it for 7, 10, 15 hours a day as a personal computing device. So yeah, if you're an adversary like Russia who's targeting a country that isn't America for this, like, it makes sense that they're going after Androids, because if you're a Ukrainian soldier, you probably have an Android operating system, right?
If you're in most places in the world, you have an Android operating system. I think that's one of the benefits of the Android operating system is its portability.
Mm-hmm.
Its ability to be adapted into different flavors, and those are used by different phone companies throughout the globe. So compounding that becomes a patch level on all these devices. So this, I think, most recently in the news from a different other lens there was a Chinese intelligence organization that put an app on the Google Play Store, Android app, obviously. And it was used to collect intelligence on the Uyghur population. So the other side of that, this is for supporting the warfighter, and that was just a straight, intelligence gathering. And I think this is very targeted intelligence collecting to support the war effort. I don't think that's to say to discount any, externally placed intelligence, operations that might be going on, but it definitely shows a focus in one specific area.
It's interesting to me that it's been this long for it to come out. I was at a conference a couple months ago, and they had a session on Ukraine, Russia, and they were talking about attacks by Russians on Ukraine infrastructure. And one of the questions from the researchers was actually about, I'm surprised we haven't seen more mobile discussions. And I think part of it is probably people aren't looking as much. It's hard to get that what there's less telemetry unless you're collecting. And we were talking about this, 2-3 weeks ago, MDM, Mobile Iron, or what's the Invencia, or whatever the pharmaceutical drug name for the company is. Ivanti, right? Like, unless you're running one of these sort of mobile device management or mobile device protection, you're not getting very much telemetry. And the way that most organizations deal with it is if you're running something like Google or Outlook on your phone, you're hoping it's fairly jailbroken and all these other things, or celled, so that you're not getting into other places and can be remotely deleted without that third-party administration. But there's not you got to work hard to get that telemetry.
What if I'm running something like SORM? Hypothetically,
I don't know, Mick. What would happen?
I would just collect all the metadata from the phone anyway, right?
Right.
Yeah. We have a question in the chat from Devesh, who is asking, how would you impose cost on the human operators in no extradition countries? Is it sanctions? Obviously, when you have people in no extradition countries, if someone's operating out of Russia, for instance, they're really operating with impunity and they don't face consequences. In fact, the Russian government probably supports what they're doing as long as they're not targeting Russian companies, right? When it comes to ransomware, for instance. In this case, I think it is more complicated because it's a war, right? And U.S. involvement has been, well, I guess, however you assess that to be so far, whether it's enough or not enough, I don't think it's been enough, but that's my own personal opinion. But I know that's kind of a more controversial topic. But I think
limits. I mean,
sanctions.
We're not doing much. There was I remember right before the invasion, there was a thing where the FBI was trying to get Russia to work with them on a ransomware operator. And then they were like, oh, well, we'd love to help you if you just reduce your sanctions, because, we can't do anything with these sanctions. Otherwise, we'd love to help you. It doesn't really work. And this is why, to your point, they're able to work with impunity until they find out that they did the wrong thing and that their 5th floor window was broken.
Right. Well, right
Sounds like
before,
malicious homework.
do you remember right before the war started, there were actually talks of indictments of Russian ransomware cyber criminals. Do you remember that? That was actually happening. We had named individuals who were behind, I can't remember what ransomware group it was, but Russia was actually working with the United States. It was kind of an exchange that they wanted, and that in return they would provide that. And then that obviously fell apart when the war started. So I think we were on that track for that to be more open, but that door has closed. So all right.
Unlike the windows, which keep opening in Russia.
Oh my gosh. Moving on. I think we have some slides to get to. Actually, we have another comment. This one is, what is the defense mechanism that ideally a government can use proactively to safeguard them from a cyber war? Do we contain all the endpoints given the facts he doesn't have?
So I think the idea is, how do you protect a nation from cyber war? We talked about this a couple months ago. I believe you had something called DERP, Mick.
I did.
Part of it was the idea of what is the role of the government to protect citizens against cyber attacks and cyber warfare, and how that hasn't necessarily been really tested yet.
Well, I think the problem becomes when you look at a cyber war. If a cyber war happens, is the infrastructure nationalized to the point where there can be a federalized response as quick as there needs to be? Like, we have one kinetically when things like happen, disasters, stuff like that. We have FEMA that will go out and provide relief and assistance to it, but is there a digital version of that? And is that response time by that magical agency I just made up, is that fast enough?
And, we have seen initiatives play out ever since the report, the Volt Typhoon report came out from Microsoft about Chinese threat actors potentially pre-positioning against U.S. critical infrastructure. There's been a big push to try to increase defenses for critical infrastructure in the U.S. because if there was a, quote, cyber war in the United States, most likely we would see the targets being critical infrastructure, wouldn't you say? That would probably be target number one. Military bases, critical infrastructure, government, those would be ideally what you would imagine they would go after. So I think hardening...
It certainly was for Ukraine. I think it'll be interesting. It depends on the level of war. Like, we haven't had a peer-to-peer war for 70 years. And the question will it be a full peer-to-peer war, or will it be a gradual step up and incremental? Because I could certainly see something where low-level skirmishes, and then it's keeping against, email servers to email servers. But then if it was like an actual invasion against Guam or Taiwan or something like that, you could suddenly see a larger attack, but limited in rules of engagement to those specific areas.
And something to consider too is China does not have a military base in the Western Hemisphere. And that could mean that cyber operations play a larger role if there was conflict between the United States and Russia. That was something I was actually thinking about, the fact that they don't have a military presence in the Western Hemisphere. What does that mean? They have a base?
They don't have a base.
A base. Yeah. Right. That's what I mean.
Presence they have a presence. Let's be super clear on that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let me rephrase that. Let me be more accurate. They don't have a base in the Western Hemisphere. So that means that their access, cyber becomes a much better way to accomplish that. Whereas we do have bases in and around, Asia. So I think that kind of changes. I'm not, obviously an expert in war, but I think that would maybe change how you would approach something like that, depending, like you said, on the level of what that conflict is. Is it, like we saw in Russia and Ukraine, if this is a physical war, a hot war, then does cyber play less of a role because, a drone launching a missile is maybe more effective than a cyber attack? I don't know. Someone says China is in Cuba.
Allegedly.
Well, an official base.
That's
a spy base in Cuba. That's fair. There was a report that came out earlier this year about that, a new military training facility.
What if it's in a BRI country that China has given resources and executive leadership teams to and helped build it up?
Yeah.
It's not a base, right? But it's like a resource. Anyway, it's a whole deeper dive.
Okay. Well, we could go on and on about this. I think that it'll be hopefully it will never come to that. I am really hopeful that that will never.
It's, I will say the Nicole Perloff's book, I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but that was actually one of the really good sections she had, was around American critical infrastructure's soft underbelly for near peer or peer warfare. So if you're interested in the subject, I recommend reading that.
Yeah.
Perhaps just that chapter.
And there was a story that just came out too about potentially launching a Department of Water to help confront cyber threats. So there are conversations about ways to better approach that. And there's also like a contest right now to benefit rural utilities that the Department of Energy launched with
Yeah.
cyber contest. So there's things that are happening, but yeah, I think it's whether or not it's enough, I don't know. So
And
we should probably move on.
Entire segment without saying Pearl Harbor. So that's what's important to me.
A cyber Pearl Harbor.
Cyber Pearl Harbor.
Yep. All right, let's go on to our upcoming events. So a quick plug for our podcast. This is the Security Detail. Kirsty Payne and myself, we co-host this. We have an episode that is coming out tomorrow about the financial sector, and we have an interview with Paul Truman, who works in threat intelligence with MasterCard and is very knowledgeable about cybersecurity in that sector. So it was a great interview, and that launches tomorrow. You can check it out. You can use the QR code. You can go to thesecuritydetail.podbean.com. We're also on Apple, Spotify, all the other major applications. And I think our next slide, oh my gosh, it's not updated.
Oh no.
Well, disregard, this should say June. This should say June. June 10th through the 13th is .conf. Yeah, Drew's like, we're just going to skip past that.
We're done.
No, do it live.
Thank you, Drew. I failed again. I failed again at getting this together. It's because of the FAA ground stop got me really distracted, so I apologize. I was all leaning into that. But yeah, so we have bots already happened, but Mick, you are going to be speaking at a summit here this week. Tell us about it.
I will be speaking on a panel Thursday at the Billington Cybersecurity Summit, which actually I think just started today. So if you're in the DC area, come on, check it out. But it's a breakout panel on the incident reporting requirements that have just come out and that are coming out. When you look at things like the SEC rulings and CISA, a group of talented folks who are going to sit and chop that up and talk about it for a little while.
Yep, sounds like a lot of fun. And then what else do we have? Shannon Davis is speaking at a number of conferences coming up in Australia.
Shannon and James Hodgkinson.
Oh, and James Hodgkinson. They're sharing their Chrome browser extension risk findings from a research project they've done, which was really interesting. And then we also have David Bianco, who is speaking at an event coming up. And Ryan, you also have Conf Go. Splunk Live Go. Sorry.
I'll be doing a keynote at Splunk Conf Go in Singapore on the 19th of September.
Yes.
So.
And I'm getting into this slide now, and I'm updating it while it's on my mind so that it doesn't happen again. June.
And then
June 10th
Shannon
through the 13th.
and James are back doing that Chrome presentation again in Australia, which I think is also, I don't know where that one is, but it's in Australia. I think Melbourne. For the Australian Cybersecurity Conference, and they're speaking about Chrome again. What was that, Mick?
I think it's Melbourne, yeah.
Yeah, Melbourne. And then .conf 24. So we've already started planning for that. Exciting stuff.
Yep. And the slide is fixed. So when it's reloaded, it will be correct. And I will stop spreading misinformation about Conf for next year.
Disinfo.
It's June. Okay. And then, of course, sign up for our newsletter. And you can get surge alerts that way. Anytime there's a major cybersecurity incident, we'll send out an alert. And you can also get our quarterly newsletter. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to our charity challenge.
And now, Splunk's Cybersecurity 60-second charity challenge. Remember the rules. You've got to get through an entire subject in 60 seconds, or you donate to today's charity of choice. Good luck!
All right, so today's charity challenge I'm actually very excited about. We were trying to think of what to do for a challenge, and I was like, we should maybe do something a little bit more technical, right? And then we were trying to think of technical topics. And then we just kind of decided in general, what is your favorite hack of all time? Whether that be an actual incident or a type of attack. What have you seen in the past where you're just like, holy cow, that is really impressive who came up with that. And so that is the charity challenge for today. And our charity for today is the Trevor Project. And this is a project with a goal to end suicide among LGBTQ people. And so they provide crisis counseling and offer resources. And so that is the charity that we're donating to today. And who wants to go first with their
Mick, I
hack?
think you won last round. Your choice.
I gotta be honest here. I don't know if we can do this in 60 seconds. That's a tricky one. So
It is. That's part of the
I'm gonna
challenge.
make you go first.
Great. Love it. All right. Well, I'm trying the new technique of I wrote it in my head rather than writing it out on script because that seems to go better for me so far. Ish. Just trying new things here. I don't get the great one-liners like Mick, but I do get a stream of pure consciousness, which sometimes works.
Oh, and before we start, people listening, please vote in the chat on who you think has the best answer when we're done. Okay.
And why it's me.
Hello, folks in the chat. Thanks for joining us.
Yes.
Hi. Okay. So I think there were two really interesting things that I want to talk about, one of which I actually saw in my career and the other which I was just fascinated when I read. The first one I want to talk about is somebody once sent a spear phishing email to one of the people I was protecting that did not have a malicious link at all in it. What it had was a link to a I feel lucky link within Google, which then they Google hacked by creating a very unique string. And so what that meant was when you clicked on the I feel lucky link from Google, which was completely innocuous, it actually then redirected to the malicious link, which was a bit.ly link, which then redirected to another link that actually downloaded the malware. So what I loved about this was the actual email itself would pass just about every first level sandbox, every first level analysis, because there was nothing there for them to actually find other than I feel lucky. And they had to abuse the entire Google search engine in order to be able to do this. I thought it was really innovative. And I was going to talk about Turla, but I only have 3 seconds left, so I'll let Mick do that instead.
That's what I would do too, is Turla. But go on, Mick.
All right, hold on one second.
I hope it's
Let's see
Turla.
if I can.
Well, if it's not, then I can add my challenge. So.
All right, you ready, Drew? All right. So once upon a time in DC, there was this guy. Actually, wait. First, the best hack I saw was classified. I can't talk about this. And this is like a third most coolest one. So let's talk about this. So there's this guy named Gusev, and he's an IO that lives in DC. And the thing about being an IO is you kind of recognize the other guy in the street because spies spy on each other. It's kind of what they do. So he's under surveillance. And what happens is Gusev, he's sitting behind the State Department building with this bag beside him. And one hand inside of it, he's got an earphone in, and he's smoking a cigarette, and he's reading the Washington Post, except it's upside down, which is weird, but that happens. Days later, he gets spotted driving up and down the street, like parking in and out of the same parking spot, and he's got a Kleenex box. So what happened is people's like, hey, this guy's doing a technical collection operation. They found a bug inside a conference room in the State Department on the 7th floor where the D committee met. And the D committee is the people who decide who's chief of station.
Do you want to keep going? Do you have more?
Sure. I mean, so basically like what happened is they spotted him for a couple days. They spotted him, and he had on his car was a box with a microtransmitter, and the microtransmitter was in his pocket, and he would walk around and turn it on, and only when he turned it on would the signal emit. And that's how they found out. And as cool as hacking is, CATCO is so much cooler.
And what's CACTO?
Close access technical collection operations. Basically like bugs in rooms and sweeps.
Yeah.
When you talk about ELINT, things like that, Drew, what's ELINT?
Electrical intelligence.
And then Squint are the guys that actually just come in and look at the wall and go, hey, there's this chair railing on a wall in a conference room that looks a little bit different than the rest of them.
I remember one of the spy stories I remember is someone was gifted like this painting that they hung behind their desk, and there was a mic like embedded in the painting. Do you remember that one? That
that was probably the Great Seal that the Soviets gave. Yeah,
the Soviets. That's what I was thinking of. Yeah, that one. But my favorite hack, if I can weigh in while people
only
share
if you do it in 90 seconds.
Well, I'm not part of the challenge, so you can't vote for me, but you can vote between Ryan and Mick while I know.
You got 59,
Okay,
58,
my favorite
57.
hack is Turla, how they use Stego within Instagram comments for their C2 channels. And how they do this is they use like pastebin, like a URL shortener, and they encode it with steganography. So they use like Unicode characters, like /200D, which is like a non-printable character. It's called a zero width joiner, and it doesn't take up space, but it's present. So you can actually take these URL shorteners, take the bit.ly link, and then put it together, or it forms a bit.ly link that'll then take you to your C2. So I just thought that was really cool, and I don't have
you
more to
dropped the
fill.
lead there, though, Audra. Who was the Instagram star?
Oh, it was Britney Spears. That was the I actually have the actual example.
Base 64 comment.
Yeah, I
Well,
have it
5
right
years
here.
ago, 4 years ago, I guess now, one of the hardest boss of the sock Easter eggs of all time is actually the violent memes actually use the Violent Femmes Instagram page with a base 64 encoded C2. So for those of you who are interested in it, go play Boss of the Sock.
Tribute.
Great hack.
Yeah.
Oh, and the story I told is from 1999, just to give you an idea of
Good
how
year,
cool
good
we
year.
were back then.
Good year to graduate.
Good year to get back from a war.
Yeah.
Well, has anyone voted, or will Drew vote?
I believe Brian. So I think that's Ryan, and that's me. So
Okay.
Same.
Anyone else have an opinion? Or is Ryan the winner?
Brian has won. Brian has crushed it. Doing what he can.
If Brian is watching, you've won.
Any other
Yeah,
one?
I think we'll go with Ryan then, unless anyone sounds off in the next couple seconds. Congratulations, Ryan. You were on time. Okay, you got a second vote.
There we go.
Yay. All right.
Okay, well, I think we now have a deep dive, right, that we want to get to. Let's go ahead and roll that clip.
And now we talk about things that just happen to be on our minds with who's ever here, because we made this up before I knew who'd accept my meeting invite.
All right, so today we have a quick update on the MoveIt breach, which is still ongoing. Every day, the number of impacted organizations continues to climb. It's actually very depressing. MSISoft, which is a New Zealand-based cybersecurity firm, they have this blog. I'll share it in the chat. And every day, they're updating this blog with a number of known organizations to be impacted by extortionware, right? That's what we're going to get into for this deep dive. The interesting thing is, so this is Qakbot, which is a ransomware group. In the past, they've done encryption, exfiltration, and whatnot. But in this attack, this is leveraging SQL injection vulnerabilities in the MoveIt file transfer appliance. And instead of going in and encrypting, exfiltrating, and then encrypting files and holding it for ransom, like we're not going to decrypt your files until you pay us, they're just leaking it. They're just saying, we're going to leak your stuff unless you pay us. And that embarrassment, that risk of having that released publicly is what they're relying on to get paid. And so that's what we're calling extortionware, whereas ransomware is when the data is encrypted and then their ransom is demanded. So with MSISoft's blog, we now have 1,158 organizations impacted by the MoveIt attack. And that's a lot. That's more than 65.6 million people who have been impacted from those breaches. Today, actually, I saw that Qakbot posted released the data. It appears they released the data for the Maximus breach, which included a bunch of information on Coloradans who are part of Medicare, a bunch of children who are part of child services in the state, 11 million people just from that one breach. And there's a whole list on this link of major breaches, each one with more than 1 million, some with several million people impacted. And so, it's impossible to calculate the cost of this, but I imagine Qakbot is making a lot of money from all of these attacks that they've launched.
It's, I think we called this out in the, the predictions, right, Mick, where we talked about this earlier this year, saying that we were going to move past ransomware and get to a point of just, why even bother with the ransomware? Just get the money, get the stuff, and then tell people you're going to do something with it. I don't think we predicted the the public extortion part. But we did talk about this. It's fascinating to me that we've just kind of moved past the ransomware into this new world.
I'm also curious if it's an adopted tack, right? How many other groups and actors are taking the same course and leveraging the same thing as well? And is that going to make a difference via policy, whether that be international policy or legislation that's adopted, or cyber insurance policies? Will that distinction be made there?
Yep. And in MSISoft's blog, they actually have a paragraph saying, is this the end of ransomware? And they think it's time to retire that term, ransomware, just because, typically in the past it was used to describe when your data was locked and you had to get a decryption key. And today's attacks are more complex, human-directed. If encryption happens at all, it's often the very last step in the attack chain. So that's what they're saying. I think that that's a fair assessment. So data extortion events is what they're calling it, which is similar to extortionware, because there is a difference between extortion and ransom encryption. I don't know. But then again, ransomware isn't inaccurate unless you define it purely as encryption has to happen. But I do think we might want to reassess how we're defining these terms, because it is becoming more common.
I like the idea of just being more clear, because if you tell me, this is exactly how we kind of had this conversation, right? This is how we started, was if you said, oh yeah, they had a ransomware incident, I assume encryption that resulted in their software being encrypted and then ransomed. I think that is the big difference there. I like the term extortion. I think that ransomware could be part of a larger branch. So you could have extortionware and then ransomware being part of that larger umbrella. Because I think you could also get to the point where you don't even take anything or do anything. You just get in and show capability, right? So Mohammed from Malaysia at 2:40 a.m., that is dedication, my friend. And thank you. Thank you.
Are you having insomnia?
Yeah, no, he don't.
Well, hopefully we can help lull him to sleep, because we're...
No, we're going to keep him up, terrified. But yeah, this is, to me, I think we just need to make a larger umbrella of what these things are. I think extortionware covers a much larger thing. And then underneath that might be extortionware.
Yeah, data extortion events, and then encryption-based data extortion and exfiltration-based data extortion is how MSISoft is trying to clarify. Because that explicitly states encryption when there's encryption involved, and that's a lot easier to know what we're talking about. But I do think people are just going to keep saying ransomware. They're going to keep referring to CLOP as a ransomware group because that's what they've done in the past. So, yeah, that's all I have on that. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Ryan? Are we, Mick?
Not really. It's such a thing. It's just not going away, as you said, and rightfully, truthfully called out, 2 months ago now, Audra, that Move It was going to be a huge thing that kept going. It continues to keep going. It continues to get expound. I think we're going to have another Move It or something similar that's extortion, not ransomware based. And that brings us basically to 45 minutes. So it's...
And how do you know when a vulnerability comes out, knowing in advance that this is going to turn into a Move It scale incident? I think that's going to be a big question moving forward too, because we keep seeing some high severity, critical, even vulnerabilities involving file transfer, file share applications. And so how do you know when the next one comes out? How do you know that that's... I guess you just have to make it a priority and hope it doesn't come to that, but it's still going... If it's an internet exposed service like that, then you have to take it seriously, I guess, is the lesson learned from this. So I guess that's all I have to say on it. So we'll wrap it up. I know last time we were trying to come up with more things to say, but I think that's all we have. So thanks everyone so much for watching. And Mick, I see you have a vote as well about the physical security. Yeah, with that, we're going to have another episode next Tuesday. I believe next Tuesday we're going to have an interview Is it Jamie Williams next week, Ryan?
Yep, Jamie Williams, and then we'll have Cher DeGrippo, and we have a whole group of people coming up soon. So
Yep. So
it'll
we'll
be
have
fun.
an interview with Jamie Williams over at MITRE for next Tuesday at 11 a.m. Pacific. So I'll hope you'll join us then. And I guess we'll go ahead and take it away. Thanks, everyone.
Have a good one, folks.
Surge.